Well, a very good afternoon and welcome to the National Concert Hall. My name is Tom Redmond, this is our conductor, David Brophy, and this is your very own National Symphony Orchestra. So, in about half an hour's time, we're going to hear a complete performance of Tchaikovsky's Fantasy Overture, Romeo and Juliet. And before that, we're going to dissect it. We're going to take it apart and look at it and work out how and why Tchaikovsky did and wrote the things that he did in order to bring this music, this story, to life. So first, the context. So 1869, Tchaikovsky is in his late 20s. He's a professor at the Moscow Conservatoire. He's written his first symphony. He's written his first opera, but he hasn't yet established himself as the composer that we now recognize him as being. He hadn't yet broken, I suppose, onto the main stage. He was being mentored by another composer called Mili Balakarev, who was a harsh mentor. He was a harsh friend. And Tchaikovsky wrote a tone poem, and he sent it to Balakarev, who wrote back and said, "This isn't very good. Actually, we played this, the audience barely clapped, it was just noise, you didn't try very hard, you need to try harder, no one is ever going to take you seriously." And then he went further, he said, what you should do is write a piece of music based on a story by Shakespeare, you should structure it like this, and you should write it in this key. And Tchaikovsky, being the diligent student that he was, did exactly that. So he took Romeo and Juliet as a story, and he started to work on it. He wrote the first version in 1869. And it was pretty disastrous when it was first performed in 1870. He revised it in 1872, and it still didn't really get well received by the audience. And so he worked again in 1880. He did the third revision, and it was third time lucky. Finally, he got a piece of music, though it didn't hit the ground running, it started to build his reputation, and people started to take his music more seriously. So 3 versions, and 3 is a magic number in this piece of music. 3 is a recurring number throughout. So we've got 3 versions of Romeo and Juliet, 3 musical themes, 3 ideas that we have to know in this music. Love, strife, and we open with Friar Lawrence. So this is music of great wide harmonies, very much religious in nature, almost like listening to plain song, played by the clarinets and the bassoons. And a 3 theme broken into 3 phrases. Now, I will make the assumption that you all know the story of Romeo and Juliet, because you're studying it as a set work. However, if I'm wrong in that assumption, and you don't know what's going to unfold in this story, then we know from what's happening now that all is not well, that this is music of drama and tragedy. We're going to hear a series of rising one-note dissonances in the strings and horns. There's no crescendo, but the accents, the chromaticism in the harmony immediately give us a feeling of anxiety. So the dissonance carries on in the flutes and the clarinets, but we start to build momentum with this flowing pattern in the cellos. And then we hear this beautiful harp. rising chords of optimism and aspirational love. So that rising sequence in the harp happens 3 times. And each time that segment of music returns, we hear it 3 times. Tchaikovsky driving his point home. Now, those falling notes that we just heard in the violins there, where they were playing with their fingers, the pizzicato notes, may be, on first hearing, fairly insignificant. But Tchaikovsky uses everything that he has and recycles it, twists and turns. Just listen to what the clarinet plays in the 3rd bar of this piece. Three falling notes. Now, could you play it staccato for us? So the 3 falling notes from Friar Lawrence is suddenly put into this momentum-building pattern in the violins. Let's just carry on from where we stopped, please, and just listen how the strings turn that into the structure. The falling pattern carries on, and we hear a fuller utterance of Friar Lawrence in the woodwind. Which then leads us to another utterance of those rising dissonances. But now the violins are playing what the flutes had before. And all of that leads us to the harp again. Those rising chords of optimism. Again, we hear them 3 times. Now, it feels like we've had our slow introduction. And if this was a symphony written 50 years earlier, then yes, we would have had that, and then we would have been off into the drama, into the allegro of the music, if you like. But Tchaikovsky is going to make us wait. He starts to build the drama, he builds the tension. We have a section marked poco a poco stringendo accelerando, getting gradually, bit by bit, faster. A pedal note in the timpani adds a feeling of menace, and Friar Lawrence is becoming more manic as he tries to calm feuding families. He puts the brakes on again, because Tchaikovsky is a composer of theatre, and he knows that if he draws this out, we get more and more tension. What follows are another series of dissonances, and then sequence of quite severe B minor chords between the woodwind and then the strings. And if we think of this as cinematic music, and it's very easy to do that, this is the moment where the camera would pan between the two feuding families. Their face, I hate you, and they get gradually furious, and then the fight begins. So there we are, music of strife, music of violence and fury, but actually quite exciting music as well. Now, the drama, the excitement is brought about through syncopation, through jagged rhythms and clashing harmonies. Let's just hear the strings at that point, please, at 112. Now, the problem, the thing that's really making us all angry is one note, F sharp. And it's an unresolved note that sits in the strings in these chords. If we could just play the first chord you have, please, at 112. So it's a B minor chord, followed by an E minor chord. But the F sharp is still there, and it clashes, it grates against everything else. So if we just stop there and do the same again, but without the F sharp, please. It's sad, but it's no longer angry. And F sharp is the note that just sits in between there, causing us to sort of grit our teeth a little bit. And F sharp minor is the key that we began in, and it's a note that has significance later on in this story. So we've got sort of slightly scrunchy harmonies, we've got syncopation, we've got angular rhythms, but there's more that makes us feel unsettled in this. I'm going to ask the violins, please, to play 126. Just listen to the way that Tchaikovsky takes one line but splits it between the two families of violins. So our ear tries to lock on to one thing, but it can't because it keeps shifting. Now, if we imagine the orchestra 100 years ago, quite often you would have had the first violins there and the second violins where the cellos are. So that music would have had you going left and right, like watching a tennis match. Who's going to hit it next? Or maybe we're sort of dodging punches and blows. I don't know. But it makes us feel unsettled. And whilst that's going on, we've got the woodwind against the cello and the basses as well. And again, it's as if they're speaking behind each other's hands, saying cruel things about one another as they start to play with contrapuntal effect. They're not very nice to each other, are they? Okay? But they are normally, if you see them backstage, the woodwind, the cellos and the basses all get on terribly well, but they are in character now, so they're being cruel and mean. So if we go back to that series of B minor chords that we heard earlier on, woodwind versus strings, it becomes more pronounced in the music that we're going to hear. We're building up to the most dramatic moment in strife when the cymbals suddenly start to clash, the swords start to bash into each other. But before that, the two families of instruments, the Montagues and Capulets, start to antagonize each other just a little bit more. It's as if they're egging each other on with this rising sequence. It goes, tick it up, 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 and they're pushing each other half a semitone, each time higher, 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 until finally, poof, they cannot stop themselves from going into full sword-fighting conflict. And I think we should have a round of applause, please, for the cymbals. Now, like any story, any film, you can't stay in one particular mood for long. We can't keep in this moment of anger and strife. It would be exhausting. He keeps us going for a little bit longer, but then he starts to slow things down, and he starts to use some of the same material to change the mood, to lead us into something different. Let's go from 159. listen in the flutes and the clarinets. That little motif that was antagonizing the strings earlier on is broadening. The bassoon rising, a feeling of optimism. It's like we can breathe out a little bit. And if we weren't so cruel, we'd carry on. We'd slide beautifully into D-flat major, and we'd finally hear the love theme that we've all been waiting for. But before we do that, I want to focus on the keys that Tchaikovsky uses in this music. Because prior to the 20th century, great significance was put on the meaning and feeling that different keys created in music. You notice a lot in song, where a composer will choose a particular key to reflect the mood of the text that they've set. And Tchaikovsky, though he was only acting on Balakarov's instruction to begin in F-sharp minor, uses a series of keys that have quite a great deal of significance in the tragedy of this story. So, strings, I'll ask you please to play a chord of A major and just sustain that. So that's where we were. Okay, we were in A major, and this is a bright, jolly key. This is a key of youthful cheerfulness, trust, and declaration of innocent love. Now that's a beautiful thing. Now let's slide to D-flat major, please. And this is the key that we'll be in a moment, where we finally hear the love theme. But this is a key that degenerates into grief and rapture. B minor. Now that was the key where the woodwind and the strings were antagonizing each other a moment ago. A key of awaiting one's fate. F minor. F minor was the key that we first heard the harp offering those rising chords. A key of deep depression, lament, groans of misery, and longing for the grave. It's really not a Christmassy key at all. Then let's go to D major. Now D major is the key that we'll hear later on, the great utterance of love theme in one of the climaxes of the music, a key of triumph, of rejoicing. F sharp minor, the key in which we began, a gloomy key, tugs at passion like a dog biting a dress. Resentment and discontent are its language. And then A major. And we'll just stop there for a second. So in each of those keys, a particular emotion is portrayed. And Tchaikovsky was aware of that when he wrote this music, and quite aware of he uses those keys at particular moments to depict particular emotions. Now, we're going to carry on now. So we've just had that beautiful A major chord, and now we're going to slide into D flat, and we'll hear Tchaikovsky's greatest melody. And that's all he gives us. That's it. We've waited all that time, and finally, just the briefest glimpse of love. Now, I just want to take a moment to talk about Tchaikovsky's orchestration as well, because that was one of his great skills, the way he colored his music. And orchestration is really like mixing colors on a palette, like an artist would. And you mix them to create the right mood. And then a conductor's job is to try and reimagine those colors. And if we had 3 different conductors, we'd hear this piece in 3 different ways. But at the heart of that music are the violas and the cor anglais. And at the heart of the orchestra, and instruments that just meet beautifully in the middle. Just in the middle of their range. They're not forcing, it's not high, it's low. They are just in that beautiful comfort zone of resonance and warmth. And if we look at this from an anthropological point of view, a study of humans, it's quite interesting that he should find those voices in that way. This is a story of a binary relationship between man and woman, Romeo and Juliet. And naturally, the voices of male and females are separated by about an octave. So if I were to offer Elaine a cup of coffee in the morning, I'd say, would you like a cup of coffee? And she'd say, yes, please, that would be very nice. And so we would carry on. We won't also speak at that pitch, though we are musicians. We speak, but there is a natural gap of about an octave in day-to-day conversation. However, and this may make some blush, in moments of intimacy, voices start to change. A male voice starts to rise, female voice starts to lower, and they meet in the middle. So rather than getting, I would like to kiss you, that would be very nice, instead it's, I would like to kiss you, that would be very nice. The two are the same. And that's what you have in this beautiful combination of violas and cor anglais. And then you add to that the effect of the mute. I'm going to ask for the same passage, just the love theme again, but could you play it without your mutes this time, violas? It's a subtle difference, but it makes all the difference.
184.
Now, I don't know how much difference you can tell. Let's do it now with the mutes immediately on, so you can hear the change. But that was sort of overly bright, slightly manic, I love you! And this is different. And all it is a tiny piece of rubber they put over the bridge of the instrument, and it's like putting a different filter on a lens. And it just softens everything. It's like looking through a beautiful sepia lens on a photograph of a different time, a different place. Beautiful. Thank you, violas and cor. I think that, again, a little round of applause if you don't mind. So, after that brief utterance of the love theme, we get to the secondary love theme that takes place in the violins, this gently oscillating figure that we hear now, with the pizzicato violas just underneath. Let's carry on, please. There it is, flutes and horns, that beautiful moment that we've all been waiting for. And there's a bit of dispute in the woodwind section because the flutes and the oboes play that melody. The oboes, at this point, are supporting actors, and the flutes are very much the Oscar-winning leads in this moment. The flute is an instrument of great radiance and beauty, and accompanied by that falling motif in the horns, that sort of veiled, heroic sound of that instrument. And that pairing of flute and horn is another classic in orchestration, where you're trying to represent feelings of love and heroism. Shostakovich uses it in his symphonies when he's talking about love. John Williams uses it in Star Wars when describing Princess Leia. Now, that's an awful lot of love and emotion and filtered viola playing for this time in the day. And Tchaikovsky knew that there would be only so much that you could swallow before it became saccharine sweet. So he takes us to the end of the exposition section with this sort of beautiful moment of breath, like lying in a meadow looking up at a cloudless sky. Beautiful. Now, we have arrived at the development section. This is music in sonata form. So we have exposition, development, then recapitulation. Now, ordinarily, a composer would have two musical ideas, two themes that they would have in sonata form. Tchaikovsky has three. And in this section, he starts to play with them. He starts to examine them, explore them, and what seems like entertain himself with the way he treats this material. So we've got a mixture now of Strife and Friar Lawrence to set us off into the development. So we've got that effect, this time of the first violins passing to the violas, these semiquavers going back and forth. Friar Lawrence still trying to calm things down. But he's unsettled by a syncopation that we hear in the first violins. And then Tchaikovsky, really making his point, breaks the rule of three. And in this section, as you'll hear later on, Friar Lawrence appears 4 times to really try and calm the mood. Let's go on from 293. Now, you can imagine this is all going to lead to a greater announcement of strife and violence. But hidden within that, we can still find love. And I'll show you what I mean. Let's go, please, from 331. So where do we find love in all of that? You can always find love in the first violin section, I know. First, could you just play what you have for us there to start with? Okay, now, if you could just play those 4 quavers, beginning on the G sharp. And now do that broadly and add the F sharp, please. So in amongst all of that fury, anger, all we needed to do was add an F sharp. The same note that gave us great harmonic sort of teeth-gnashing moments earlier on is the same note that would have brought us back love into the first violins. So we've got love intertwined with strife, we've got outbursts of Friar Lawrence, but Tchaikovsky hasn't finished playing with this material yet. We return to that secondary love theme, that gently oscillating passage that we heard on the violins, but this time it's played on the oboe and the clarinet, but with this odd seasickness-inducing past the semiquaver between first and second violins. So we've had love hidden within strife, we've had the secondary love theme, so we know that at this point it's sort of almost going in reverse order, and now Tchaikovsky is going to announce our main love theme, and he does. The moment that Romeo and Juliet marry, and we hear it in D major. You remember earlier on we talked about the significance of D major, the key of triumph, of wonder, of glory, and all things good. And then we move on, and then Tchaikovsky approaches the love theme from a slightly different angle. Let's carry on from the upbeat to 405. So they're married, they're in love, and this time we hear love from above. The falling feature in the horns, and then the horns, the voice of love brings syncopation. It unsettles us. Then we get love in canon between the cellos and the woodwind, with this strange sort of ricochet effect in the violins. Then love returns. but is swept away by strife. Friar Lawrence. Swept aside. So nothing is going to stop the fury and the anger from taking over this story. It's all leading us towards the ending that we know is there. Now, interestingly, many years later, another Russian composer, Sergei Prokofiev, wrote a ballet to Romeo and Juliet, and it was suggested to him that he might try and change the ending and turn it into an everyone lives happily ever after. But that's really to lose something of what the Shakespeare play is really all about. Tchaikovsky sticks with the tragedy, and we've just arrived at the moment, the coda that we knew that was coming. The inevitable death of both our main characters that could have been avoided. Now we get the triplets in the timpani like a funeral drum, and then an unhumanly long note in the tuba that almost leads to asphyxiation and death of the player, that adds to the morbid curiosity of this moment in the music, and the death instruments coming to the fore, the bassoons and the cellos, instruments that Tchaikovsky uses much later in his Sixth Symphony, a particularly gloomy work to depict this tragic, tragic ending. And arguably, Tchaikovsky could have ended it there. You know, it's not a happy ending, it's a tragic ending. We know that that is the end. But he just recaps, and he goes back to the three themes that bring the piece alive. We hear a very resigned and sorrowful Friar Lawrence. And then we hear the love theme for the final time, soaring higher and higher in the strings, in the key of B minor, the key that earlier on saw the woodwind facing off against the strings. A key is awaiting one's fate, but is also a calm submission to divine dispensation. And then to finish, the chords we'll hear in about 15 minutes' time, furious, insincere, angry at the futility of the whole thing, that it should have ended as tragically as it did. So there we go. We've taken it apart, and now we're going to put it back together. David Brophy and the National Symphony Orchestra will now perform for you Romeo and Juliet by Tchaikovsky.